Hello and welcome to Chapter 14 in Introduction to Psychology. We're going to be looking at health and stress. Of course, very important issues that we talk about, and the probably the new age of psychology is the importance that human behavior patterns have on overall stress and health, a direct connection between the mind and the body. Now, this in the history of psychology, it really dates back to the early days of philosophy and the mind-body duality, the separation of mind from body. And the effort of health psychology is to bring those things back together, that how we think and behave interacts with our body, and our body interacts with how we think and behave. They're connected. So we're going to launch into this particular topic by taking a look first at some history here, just very briefly. The history of clinical psychology is largely focused on dysfunction and maladaptive behaviors. Now, it's important to understand dysfunction and maladaptive behaviors because throughout the history of psychology, that is what clinical psychologists have been paid to deal with. We have individuals with disease, we have to fight those diseases off. As the tables turn a little bit, and now there's aside from having disease and dysfunction, how do we maximize human flourishing? How do we maximize happiness? How do we do that? Let's take care of the other part of the population too. And some psychologists started to focus on that particular area, and that was the advent of positive psychology. And a lot of positive psychology focuses on health and wellness, which is sort of the subject of this particular chapter. So, how stressed are you? Now, one of the factors that comes into play is bandwidth. And as I'm doing this video, we're in this particular semester, we're leading to the end of the class. And essentially, lots of people are feeling full. They're feeling I've got, information pounding into my head. If you're a full-time student, you're taking multiple classes, so each one of that is a different hat. You got all this information. And life, it's not like life just paused for a while and lets you get through your classes unless you're very fortunate. You have all that stuff going on. And if we kind of approach our cognitive capacities for dealing with information change and processing and decision making, we only have so much bandwidth. This is a capacity issue. Some people have large bandwidth, they can deal with a lot of things. Some people have less so. And learning those limitations, pushing on those limitations to expand them, doing those things are very, very important in terms of managing your stress. And this, of course, happens over time. For instance, I have numerous students who during this fall semester signed up for 5 classes. Going into the spring semester, they're only signing up for 4. Now, they may be successful in those 5 classes, but as they go into the next semester, they're like, okay, that was a little push on my stress level. And basically what they're talking about is bandwidth. How much room do I have day to day? And then stressful events, which we will measure using the Holmes-Ray Life Stress Inventory. That's a free stress test. Go ahead and look it up. When you look at that stress test, we look at events that come along, good events and bad events that occur in your life that add to bandwidth. Because we have our normal days, and then there's the day our tire goes flat. Then we have our normal day, and then during that day we find out that your cousin is pregnant, and it's a really joyous thing. No matter what it is, it adds to that bandwidth, and we are further challenged to try and keep all these things going. So we have the capacity somebody has to process life, and then we have stressful events, good and bad, that add to that bandwidth, and that's sort of the experience of how do we manage that? How do we maybe we expand our bandwidth temporarily? We're going to get to the end of that event, and then it goes back down again. But then we have sort of chronic stressors push that capacity sometimes beyond our capacity, and that's when we start to get in trouble. So those are some of the ways in which we look at the actual stress that somebody has. Then we have the concepts here of general adaptation syndrome and crisis fatigue. I'm going to briefly describe these things. This video is really not meant for a full exploration of those issues, but general adaptation syndrome is when an individual maximizes out their bandwidth and they're able to manage it, but they're about one jam stapler away from losing it. So from the outside, the individual looks like they're holding it all together, but they're barely holding it together. There's so much going on, and they're keeping a cap on it, but they're really close to that being out of control. So that what happens is the human, let's look at the mind-body connection, the individual is engaged in that much bandwidth, it starts to affect the body. It affects the body because mechanisms in the brain are constantly on alert for that jammed stapler where you're going to just lose it, right? So you're constantly close to and enacting the systems of fight or flight. Those mechanisms interact with our body in such a way that they prepare us constantly for that jam stapler that's coming along, that one thing that's going to throw you over the edge, the straw that broke the camel's back sort of thing. So you're ever ready, ever managing to make sure that you don't cross that line into getting out of control. And this actually affects your health in negative ways. All kinds of adrenaline going into your body, all kinds of suppression of your immune system going into your body. As you are preparing to flight, you are neglecting your immune system. So over time, this can interrupt your immune system. You get sick. It interrupts your sleep cycle, so you lose sleep, and this is a downward spiral. So this is not a good thing. Here's the thing, though. Here's because there's so much adrenaline that's going on in this, you actually feel really accomplished. If you're able to pack your day with things and just barely get by because of that infusion of adrenaline and other good feeling hormones in your body, because you're at a constant stress level, you actually feel good. You feel energized, you feel positive, and stuff like this. But it's a mistake to think that this is a long-term lifestyle sort of thing. The body breaks down. We're not meant to be always in crisis. And then that slips over to crisis fatigue. Now, crisis fatigue is something that has become somewhat of a popular item here after our pandemic experience. That crisis fatigue is when an individual's capacity for dealing with situations starts to become lower and lower because the crisis is not going away. Crises are supposed to be short term. That's how our bodies are made. When I'm out in the woods and I come across a rattlesnake, this of course never happened certainly in Maine, come across a rattlesnake, I go into stress, I successfully avoid getting bit by the rattlesnake, and then I move away. I'm not surrounded by rattlesnakes all the time, so I'm able to move away and calm down. Crises are supposed to be short term. Now think about the crisis after crisis after crisis that have been happening in our modern world, affecting people in the West who have largely been spared some of the world things that are going on. There's a war going on, but it's not happening here. That would be horrible. It's happening in Ukraine, which is horrible, but it's not happening here. But it's happening there, so that's part of it. Then we have the pandemic that just keeps on hammering us. Then we have political uprisings. That keeps on going on. We have the stress of our normal day. We have prices going up, gas. We're in sort of a recession, kind of economy going on right now. You're isolated because of the pandemic. You're arguing with people about politics over Thanksgiving. You don't have enough money to have the kind of Christmas you would like, and there's still a war going on, and there's an election coming up, and if I see another ad, I'm just going to puke. All of those things gradually snowball and can produce what we call crisis fatigue. Great country song called My Give a Damn Is Busted. And that song sort of captures what crisis fatigue can be like. I'm done. I'm overly stressed out. And the individual can then become incredibly dysfunctional. They can resort to, of course, to substances and drinking, delinquency, crime, ignoring their responsibilities. They revert, basically, if you want to go Freudian with this, they revert to a period of time in which they didn't have responsibilities and I don't care anymore. And that's a very destructive point of view. Doesn't really work in the long term, and decisions that people make now to not give a damn can certainly affect their future. So being aware of, just holding it together, that syndrome, and then repeated crisis over a period of time, this is challenging the world of psychology to come up with, well, what do we do about this? We have not had to deal with this as a large society since the World Wars. The World War was a chronic stress. We dealt with that as a different generation. How do we deal with this chronic stress, multiple crises in the modern day? And there's quite seriously, and with no flippant comment on the pandemic or not, but the pandemic is producing the largest human experiment in history. As the world of psychology grapples with how do people do well, how do they thrive in this particular environment, how do people cope with repeated stressors, how will people get through, and how do we help people to get through in these unique circumstances that we call all of these stressful events that are happening all over the world at the same time. How do we manage this stress? There's lots of different things that we can do. We have to first recognize that we all have stress. That's, in a way, okay. It's okay to have that bandwidth full. It's okay to experience some level of crisis fatigue. It's okay to have stressful events coming along. It's okay to try and spin all those plates, keeping everything balanced and whatnot. But what do we do? Most people have those things, whether they chose them or not. But what can we do to address our mind-body in order to move through those things, or to live with those things, or maybe even thrive with those things? First, two different areas. Problem-focused and emotion-focused techniques. Separate these out. Problem-focused techniques are, what do I do to resolve the stressful thing? Let's say I'm looking at my bandwidth, and one of these things is an individual that bugs me who I'm friends with. Maybe I need to stop seeing that friend. Or maybe there's a club that I belong to that requires a lot of work, and I need to actually stop attending that club for a while. Or maybe there's a job that I have that is horrible, and I need to make some serious changes in my work. Maybe I need to spend less money on particular things so that my bills are not overwhelming at the end of the month. Maybe I need to do less in the day in order to increase some room in my bandwidth. Those are problem-solving areas of dealing with stress, is making decisions about your bandwidth. The other area is to look at that bandwidth and deal with the emotions associated with those. Now, the emotions could be dealing first with the high that you get from dealing with all of these things and recognizing that that is temporary. That is not a good lifestyle to keep that high going on for too long. We should have peak experiences, but we don't have to stay there all day. That's unhealthy. Dealing with that decision that I'm going to have a less exciting life, I guess, and tone things down a little bit and wait for opportunities for peak experiences maybe. Then there's also let's say one of the factors that you're dealing with is maintaining grades, and maybe you have an idea that you absolutely are connected with always getting A's. Maybe we need to modify that thinking. Maybe we need to, we're going through some loss or grief about something, and maybe we need to journal about that and kind of get that emotions out. Maybe go to therapy, talk to some people, maybe enhance our spiritual life if that's it. Take walks in the woods to clear our minds and reconnect with the positive things in our lives. We might not be able to change all those bandwidth things, but we can change the way we think and feel about them. So those are two approaches to dealing with bandwidth and stresses that come along. And so we look at those as possible solutions for managing stress. There's also the issue of control theory. Now, control theory is actually you don't see it much now, but the control theory is by a guy named Glasser, theorist by the name of Glasser, who his particular approach to therapy was to work with people on their sense of control. Now, this is not new, but it is an important task of which I think you're probably already aware of. So here's what happens. Here's what often happens. When we have a lot going on, there are aspects of our stress level that are not in our control. I can't make the pandemic go away. I can't make that test go away. I can't make my parents' influence on me go away. I tried to make that ex go away, but they still seem to be hanging around. All of these, you might look at that set and say, you know what? There are things that are just simply not in my control. There are other things in which I can make decisions. Refer to the first point that I make. I can make decisions about being part of a club. I can make decisions about how much emotional energy I'm going to put into something. I can do that. The key is understanding the difference between those. We have a tendency, we have a bias. In order to keep our energy level high, get this. This is very interesting stuff. In order to keep our energy level high and keep us with those endorphins coming in and adrenaline and whatnot, sometimes we focus on hopeless issues. We focus on the things that we can't control because it keeps that energy up. We're angry, we're frustrated. That infuses us with energy. It's actually enlivening for us to focus on things that we can't control because they're just going to remain there. We can't change them, and we may spend a lot of time perseverating or thinking a lot about those issues of which we have no control. But while we're doing that, we're missing the opportunity to actually take active action in reducing our bandwidth. By focusing on the things we can't control, we miss the opportunity to change the things that we can control. Recognizing that there's a benefit for us doing that in terms of energy and avoiding the difficult challenges that would have here. So let's say I have a lot of homework and I need to quit one of my clubs that I belong to. So I focus on the homework. And why is there so much homework? And that energizes me and that keeps going there when I don't really want to quit that club that I belong to, but I'm going to have to. But if I keep on focusing on this stuff, I never have to face the difficult decision of quitting that club, which would resolve some of the stress. There'd be less things to do and stuff like that. But it's disappointing and frustrating, and I'm going to be embarrassed. I have good friends there. I'm going to lose those connections. Those are difficult decisions to make, and we avoid making those decisions and keep ourselves energized by focusing on the things we can't change. What a trap that is. In the world of substance use disorder, there's a phrase, it's called the serenity prayer, that focuses on this. So this dates back to the early 1900s when Alcoholics Anonymous came back. Now this is in reference to a higher power or God, but it outlines this sort of understanding of the world in these two phases. So the serenity prayer states, God, grant me just the serenity, peace, to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, because it takes courage, and the wisdom to know the difference. That phrase encapsulates control theory. Control theory is understanding what do I have control over and what I don't have control over, and focusing my energies on the things that I have control over. This is vital to stress management. Spending too much time perseverating or worrying or complaining or whatever about things you can't change is just not the way for a long-term, healthy, successful stress management. So, little nugget of gold there for you from this class. Social supports. Now, of course, this one, having friends. In fact, that's again, you might look at that club that you belong to. If that's a key social support, that might not be the one that you need to let go. Maybe you need to let go of something else. Maybe you need to let go of always having A's. Maybe you have to let go of other activities that you're going on that are not as important. But social supports are incredibly important. This was actually what took a hit during the pandemic. We didn't have as much interaction with other people. You went to school online. Most of the people who are going to be watching this video are going to be taking classes online, and there's something that's missing. Not that learning can't happen. Learning can happen. That you can still have, but you don't only go to school to learn. You go to interact with people and enjoy that social interaction, and that's a motivating factor of taking classes and learning new things together. And when you're doing things online, it's less of that. There's an effort through discussion boards and stuff like that to make it more social, but the social piece is missing. And when we were isolated, maybe some of you still are, even isolated with a mask and unable to express emotions, which right around here, that inability, we actually adapted a bit and we were able to identify smiling eyes. There's actually been some interesting work about how we quickly became adept at determining people's emotions, even though our cues were being limited by masks. But it's not the same as hanging around. And this right now, there's lots of anecdotal stories coming out about this is the first Thanksgiving they've all been back together, looking forward to next Christmas. Maybe, early in the year there was, family events, and if there's a marriage, people are finally showing up again, and how much of a relief that is to have those supports. Social supports are very vital. Don't go through this world alone. Find individuals in your life who you can trust to be real with, this is what your partner should be. They should not be a trophy. They should not be an individual that is even necessarily on your side all the time. It is a confident, it's a person that's going to tell you what you need to hear. It's an individual who's going to respect and love you. This is really, when we look at choosing partners for our life, we have to make sure that we pick a partner who's going to be a support for us, not a negativity. All right. So there are also physical methods to reduce stress, and this really focuses on wellness, and that is, the big ones: eating right, getting enough sleep, exercise, getting outside, all of these things vital to the human animal in terms of, you have this body, maintaining the machine allows the brain to function that much better. So we can't underrate these things. So we're looking at these areas: problem-focused and emotional-focused techniques, learning what you can control and not control, social supports, and then, of course, taking care of your body. Now here I'm going to show you a little graphic here of the energy. Here's your battery. And we all have devices now, and there's maybe a little battery icon up at the top, and we see it, getting less and less as we're using up energy. Now there are activities that we can gain. Now this list may not be your list. There might be other things on these lists, things that use up energy and things that charge our batteries. And individual personalities, of course, are going to be different in terms of what uses up our batteries and what charges up our batteries and stuff. But having a balance of activities, when we set our schedule every day, and again, we're still talking about stress management here. When we set our schedule, that we balance our energy depleting activities with energy supplying activities or recharging activities. So let's take a look at this graphic here. So we have up on the top, these are things that use up energy. So we have the full battery on the left, we have the empty battery on the right, we have work, housework, ill health, paperwork, childcare, noise, caring for others, emotional loads, financial worries, and the burden of incomplete tasks. This wears us down on the top. Now, what charges us up? Look, we're getting some of this wellness, good sleep, good nutrition, spending time with friends, holidays, sort of, depending on whether you're extroverted or introverted, exercise, hobbies, fresh air, reading, watching TV, quiet, and time alone. You could use this chart as a way to look at your day and say, am I inserting things in my day as best I can to recharge my battery during the day? So during a little bit of break, can I take a walk outside? Instead of, spending time, texting, let's say, texting wasn't on there, go outside for 15 minutes. Go walk around, go experience fresh air. And we're lucky in Maine to almost everywhere you go, it's pretty clean air. And especially, I live in central Maine, and wow, I take a very short walk and I'm essentially in the middle of nowhere. And so the ability to go out and be outside or connect with friends or, have dates with your friends and maybe with your significant other, date nights, those kinds of things, engage in exercise, doing those things, and speckle those throughout your schedule to make sure that you're doing that maintenance. And then maybe even add a bedtime. This is something that I personally struggle with. I'm a work till the work is done sort of person at night. And currently, my own personal health behavior plan is actually to move towards setting a bedtime, a time at which I will go to bed every night, no matter what. Everything stops. I need to go to bed in that. Developing an actual bedtime, a time at which the electronics are done. That's all finished. I'm going to bed, probably reading a book, low light, preparing my body to sleep. That actually encourages a much more healthy sleep-wake cycle, which ultimately does a lot for my own stress management. It allows me, by having that kind of habit, it actually allows me to fill my day more. I have more energy to do more things. So staying up late and having an inconsistent bedtime seems to be more productive, but in all actuality, it's less productive over the long term. So those are ways in which we can incorporate this particular graphic into a better understanding of into a better management of our stress. So again, we're back with the advent of positive psychology. This is looking at ways in which we can thrive and live our lives. Here we have a little bit of a laundry list. Developing a sense of optimism. A little bit of challenge. If you watch the news, it's hard to be optimistic. However, the data indicates that worldwide we're actually doing better every year. And I know that confounds most people, but there's a researcher by the name of Steven Pinker who has written several books about the discrepancy between global reality in terms of how humanity is doing and what sells on the news. Bad news sells well. Bad news is what we're oriented to. I don't need to know that it's going to be a nice day. I need to know whether it's going to be a bad day so I can dress for it. So we have that tendency. I don't need to know that there's no bear out in the field where I'm going to go pick strawberries. I need to know if there is a bear. So the focus on bad news is part of our tendency, but the worldwide statistics really indicate, despite the current challenges, which are major, that the world is progressing forward in a positive way, and we need to keep doing that. That's the message of Steven Pinker. So developing a sense of optimism, data-driven understanding of what's really going on in the world. Altruism, giving freely of your time and effort and resources to others. Empathy for other people's problems and issues above your own. Creativity. Forgiveness. Compassion. And gratitude. These are attitudinal aspects of our attitude that we can do. This is on those emotional strategies here for dealing with stress. If I can become more optimistic, give of my time, volunteer, or just random acts of kindness and senseless beauty, as I say, random acts of kindness and senseless beauty, empathizing with other people, and prioritizing other people's problems, creativity, even this process right here, creating a video, is part of my creative outlet along with music. Forgiveness. When you hold a grudge, you are loading somebody else, or what's the best analogy? Someone's renting space in your brain for free. And so evicting those people out of your brain and providing forgiveness, taking that step up for those individuals. Doesn't mean you need to be friends, doesn't mean you need to be buddies and reunite or anything like that, but you can let it go. Compassion for other people, compassion for people who struggle, compassion for people. Compassion, you're in a sporting event, compassion for the other team if they lose. There was a great moment, actually, in just yesterday. The United States eliminated Iran in the World Cup. And it's very meaningful. These are lifetime achievement things for these athletes. And there's some very meaningful connections between the American team players and the Iranian team players in comforting each other and recognizing that losing this, as exciting as it is for the United States to move forward, it's very hard for the Iranian team to not be able to move forward. And those connections, particularly with that country, to see sports moving beyond the political content and people connecting at that level of sport, was a really amazing. It's one of the things I love about sports. Is that particular aspect, compassion for what's going on. And of course, gratitude. The more we learn about the world around us, the more we have to appreciate the conveniences and technology that we have, even if it's just a little, being grateful for what you have. These are attitudes, all of which address the emotional aspects of high bandwidth. Being able to encompass these things in your life. Positive psychology focuses on actually studying these and the impact on success. And these factors are more important for all kinds of success, whether it's in your job, in your life, relationships, whatever it is that you're looking at in terms of success. These are the keys to that. They're the keys to successful aging. They're the keys for successful stress management. They're the keys for successful life. So right here, this is what positive psychology is telling us, because positive psychology started looking at people who are thriving rather than looking, remember, go right back to the beginning, clinical psych focused on dysfunction. Positive psychology focused on function. So, for example, if we want to understand how marriages work, do we study divorces, or do we study people who've been together for 50 years? That's the difference between clinical psych and positive psych. When we examine individuals who have done well in this world, in many ways, we find that they're optimistic, altruistic, they have empathy, they're creative, they forgive, and they have compassion. And by and large, they have lots of gratitude for the fortune in their lives. There's the answer to happiness and thriving. So this chapter's been about stress and health, managing stress. I hope I've given it a good positive psychology spin. Stressful events and crises will continue. The capacity that we have to thrive in those situations comes from our study of positive psych. Okay, so that's this chapter, and go out and have gratitude as best as you can. And have a great week, and I'll see you next time.